Hi guys, so I'm really excited that you're here because I have a special guest with me today. It's Thanksgiving right now and my brother and his wife are up, and so I'm just going to do a quick Q&A about anxiety with him. We both have experienced anxiety and panic attacks at, varying levels. We have different stories, and so I just thought it'd be kind of a cool experience to hear what he's gone through and the ways that he has fought through his anxiety. So yeah, here we go. So this is my brother Ryan. He's a year older than me. We've had some similar experiences, but some different experiences, and so it's just kind of nice to get other people's point of view and how they've learned to deal with it and things like that. Why don't you start off by telling us the first event that had kind of triggered some anxiety for you that you...
So I just remember kind of when I was young, like probably third grade or so, I started getting really nervous about different things. I'd been in the hospital a little bit, was kind of sick for a while, and started realizing that I was scared of all these different things, usually like diseases or something bad happening to my family. So my like first memories are going on trips for like basketball and leaving my family and having these intrusive thoughts about bad things happening to my family when I was gone, which would then lead to terrible stomach pain, a lot of anxiety, elevated heart rate, and so I didn't know what was going on at the time, but later on found out that was kind of my first indicator that I had an anxiety disorder that was undiagnosed at the time. From there, like through high school, I didn't really have much issues with anxiety problems, and then about my junior year of college, just had kind of a scary event happen, and within a couple weeks I was having full-blown anxiety attacks out of the blue.
And I remember getting the phone call from Mom and her telling me that you had like a panic attack, and I remember just kind of like crying because I knew how hard they were. And then a couple weeks later it had kind of developed more, and there was like more anxiety happening more frequently. And I remember the very first thing that I told Mom was that you needed to get into a doctor or a counselor right away. Because with me, we had for so many years not known what we were dealing with, and then it kind of just grew and grew and grew into a bigger problem. And so that was my first advice to you, had been to talk to someone about it, whether it was a counselor or a doctor, so that it didn't get out of hand. And what did you find in the beginning to be most helpful?
So I'd have to say the first thing was accepting what it was. I think for a long time, I didn't want to admit that I had an anxiety disorder, just because of the stigma associated with that. With being a man, it's really hard to talk about panic attacks and having panic attacks when you're out, working in the woods or working in a mill and do different things like that. It's really hard for people to, for men especially, to kind of wrap their heads around that. Yeah, this is actually really common among men. So I'd say that was the first thing, was just accepting that, and then starting to get help. So for me, this was going to see a counselor. This was definitely being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, starting CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy, and then starting on a low dose of paroxetine, which is Paxil, and just using that combination of things to start moving forward. The other thing is I kind of dove into the literature a little bit and tried to figure out how I could help myself and what was like most effective for people with anxiety as far as managing it to get back down to a normal, healthy level.
And I think that stigma is really important to talk about. I had begun having actual panic attacks when I was 13 years old, and in high school I kind of hit my probably low point, probably my senior year and then the year after I graduated, and it was extremely hard. People didn't talk about mental illness when I was in school, which was only 10 years ago. And so over the last 10 years, I think there's been like leaps and bounds in discussing mental illness and discussing these things and really combating them. I remember going to the doctor so many times and having anxiety and panic, and they never explained to me what that was. And so I know that when Ryan started, it was a little different because we did have some background knowledge on what this was and what needed to be done, but he really took it a step further and did so much research. And even since then, I know that if I run into an issue or a question, I can call him, and more than likely he's either experienced something I have or he knows something about it, and it has been really helpful that way. And it's a really weird thing because I remember this time in high school. I was a junior and I believe you were a senior, and I was having a panic attack, and I remember he had been like, just calm down, you know. And at the time he didn't understand quite what I was going through. And obviously you want people to understand what you're going through, but you never want them to experience what you're experiencing. But it really opened a door for, I think, both of us when he had it, because I was always emotional. I was always kind of a wreck, but, you know, he was very much put together. And then to see that someone who had their life together really well still struggled with it, it was very eye-opening that, you know, it could happen to anybody. And like Ryan said, men as well as women. And so I think just having open conversations about these things are really important, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring him on, because he has a different perspective, a different view, a different story than I have, and it's important that it's shared with everybody if we can help in any way. What do you think is the hardest thing that you've experienced with panic attacks? What's the hardest part?
I think the most difficult part is when your body is basically in that fight or flight mode. You have to try and remain calm and basically just let it pass. And I think for a lot of people that's really hard to work with at first, because your physical reaction is like, again, your heart's racing, you're sweating, your body is telling you to move, like that you're in danger, that something's going on. And even mentally, a lot of times you're like, this is dumb, this is so dumb, I just need to let this pass and it'll get through. So I'd say that was one of the biggest things, was just to start trying to kind of fight with it a little bit and just try and make sure I remained as calm as possible. I'd have to say the second thing that was difficult to overcome or difficult to start was realizing like that just like any other obstacle, you have to come up with a game plan of how you can get better. For something like anxiety, it's kind of hard to nail down like one trick or one thing that works, because it's so different for everybody else, and there's so many factors that play into what can drive anxiety. So for me, it was like, okay, how do I make myself as healthy as possible while relieving stress? And so, you know, for me, a lot of that stuff was like, okay, how's my diet? How's my stress level? Am I content with what I'm doing? Am I, you know, pushing boundaries? One big thing with anxiety is you have to constantly push past the last step, because if you don't, you just remain in place. And so you always have to have that mentality that, yeah, I'm good where I'm at, but I'm gonna get better, and so I need to push myself. Agoraphobia is like common among people with panic attacks, where you know, places you feel like safe or feel like are comfortable for you get smaller and smaller over time. And so for me, because I did have that for a while, I just had to keep pushing myself, had to kind of keep getting out of my safe zone. And so it's just, like I said, coming up with a game plan of how you're going to push yourself. It's like getting in shape for something. It's the same thing. You have to try and beat benchmarks and just keep pushing on it like that.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned this year was that panic attacks and anxiety are the most treatable mental illness. And like Ryan had said, you know, there's no just like one trick that gets people better. It's a combination of so many things, and it's different for every person, but it is treatable. And that's what we have to remember. One of the things that really encouraged me with Ryan was that he was going to fight it no matter what. And there have been times in my life where I feel like I've fought against it harder than other times, but he's always been that encouragement to keep fighting. And he's always been the one that said, like, you might have taken 2 steps back, but you're going to, you know, move forward again. And so it's been really encouraging to have him there to be able to show me how he's fought and just how that's impacted him. And he had a game plan, and, he's really been able to beat a lot of the anxiety that he dealt with. And I wouldn't say that, it's all gone per se, but he is in such a far better place than he had been. And that was largely due to the fact that he chose to fight it and he had a plan of attack on how he was going to do that. Do you feel like there's been anything positive that's come from this, from having anxiety?
Yeah, so actually, when I was first in college, and this is just kind of goes back to like shyness and stuff, I hated speaking. I hated public speaking more than just about anything, and I have really bad anxiety about it. But due to learning management techniques for anxiety attacks and de-stressing techniques as well, I feel pretty confident when I speak to my classmates, or if I have to give a presentation at work or anything like that. I don't really get nervous anymore because once you deal with panic attacks on a normal basis and figure out how to overcome them, managing everyday anxiety becomes super simple.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and that might not be everybody's experience, but that was one of the huge things that I realized. I was like, wow, I came out of this with a better skill set to handle other issues that may come up in my life. So that was one positive, I'd say for sure. But the other thing is when you deal with anxiety, you have to look around and kind of assess where what's stressing you, what's causing some of these issues to pop up. And you quickly realize what's a positive, what's a negative, what I can do without, and it just kind of makes you reevaluate things. So you might find out that, this job that I'm making great money at is killing me, is making me so anxious, or is bringing me so down. Maybe I just need to change something with my job, and that'll bring me more happiness or release some of that stress. So for me, the evaluation of just kind of where my life was at, and then also just the gaining of more stress management skills was huge.
I find it funny because a lot of people do ask how, with anxiety, I am comfortable with public speaking. I've honestly always been pretty comfortable with it, but there have been times where I have been having a panic attack while speaking publicly. And Ryan is completely right that when you learn those stress management techniques, you take it into every area of life. You don't just use it for the anxiety or the panic, but you learn to use it in your everyday life. And I think just being introspective and being aware of how you feel ends up being a really positive thing. It helps move you forward. Like Ryan said, he would evaluate his life, and that's helpful because after you evaluate where you are, you can also determine where you want to go. And I always thought it was kind of a burden to overthink, and to an extent it is, but it's helped me in so many areas of life. I can really evaluate things and figure out what I want or who I am, and if something's good for me, if something's bad for me. And so I think that there are positives that come out of having anxiety, and it's not something that any of us want to go through. It's something that's really hard. But, that's kind of what this channel's about anyways, is Beauty for Ashes, taking these hard things that we go through and making something beautiful out of it. Personally, I've seen such growth in Ryan. He's always been such a loving and caring person for family and friends and everything. But he's just grown outside of himself, and he takes notice of everybody and what they're going through. And he's so compassionate, and he's also very passionate about things. And I think that without the anxiety, it may have taken longer for that passion or compassion to develop for him. And so it's just really put him on this life path of really wanting to help people, and I just think that's really cool. And I'm extremely proud of you and the things that you've done, and how you have overcome this and really used it for good. What's one piece of advice that you would want to give to somebody who's dealing with any sort of kind of mental illness?
I would say the biggest piece of advice is don't take it as a sign of weakness or something that you need to be ashamed of. These are some of the most common medical conditions that affect Americans, and people around the world, you look at it, the rates of anxiety and depression, and they're huge. So I would say the biggest thing is if you do think maybe you are experiencing some form of mental illness, whatever it is, go try and schedule an appointment with a provider, a doctor, or a mental health professional, and talk to them. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, if you think you may be going through something, to go start seeking that help. I'd say that's one of the biggest things that looking back on this experience, if I wouldn't have waited about a year and a half to start going in for counseling, I could have probably managed the anxiety before it got to such a severe level. So that's my advice to people. It's just like, if you think you're going through this, go seek help. Definitely let your loved ones know what's going on as well too. You want to make sure you have that network of support around you. So those are my two big things, is just communicate what's going on to the people around you and to medical professionals, so you can start getting that help.
Yeah. And something that Ryan mentioned before is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is the number one treatment that is recommended for treatment of anxiety. It's a combination of, working through things emotionally, but also pushing boundaries and just retraining your brain to function correctly. And I think it's important to remember that, like Ryan, when he would describe what his body was doing during a panic attack and how that felt, that your brain believes you are in danger, like he said, and so your neurons are firing and telling you to react in a certain way. And so retraining your brain to think the right way is going to be the most helpful thing for you. And that comes with just even the stress management tips that he mentioned, breathing techniques. It's training your brain how to properly respond to things. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that was helpful, and thank you so much to Ryan for being open about the things that he's gone through. I think that's so important when people are just open about mental illness and the struggle. You're not alone, and we want you to know that. So if you guys enjoyed this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more things like this, let me know. I'd be happy to do them. And go ahead and hit subscribe if you want to see my future content. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks. Bye.